Internal documents obtained by NTD reveal China was preparing for a coronavirus outbreak long before admitting there was even human-to-human transmission. In one of Beijing's districts, a video shows a family being taken away by medical staff. This district is designated as high risk. China's foreign ministry responding to global calls of accountability for the pandemic, but many point out his claims ring false. Thousands of Chinese investors suffered huge losses over the oil collapse this Monday. At the same time, it shed some light on the lack of transparency in parts of China's financial sector. And U.S. stock regulators are warning investors about the risks of Chinese company stocks. This comes after a blowout of China's biggest coffee chain and a growing list of scandals around Chinese companies. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Two Chinese doctors recovered from the CCP virus, but their skin turned very dark. Dr. Yi Fen and Dr. Hu Weifeng worked in Wuhan Central Hospital with whistleblower Dr. Li Wenliang, who was punished by authorities for sounding the alarm over the CCP virus and died after getting infected. According to Chinese media, Dr. Hu developed fever and fatigue on January 18th. Dr. Yi's symptoms developed around January 18th, several days before China announced human-to-human transmission. Dr. Li Wenliang developed symptoms even earlier on January 10th. Chinese state media quoted a doctor in Wuhan who said the livers of the two men were damaged. When iron enters the body, it is metabolized and stored by the liver. If the liver has been damaged, iron will flow into the blood, resulting in increased iron content, and this causes a darkening of the skin. A March paper from medical journal The Lancet indicated that 14 to 53% of CCP virus infections result in abnormal liver function. A liver doctor in Taiwan told us that medication for the CCP virus, such as remdesivir, may cause liver damage, and it has been reported that a number of patients with chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, and azithromycin see similar side effects. Doctors say skin color may return to normal after the liver recovers. And virus patients seem to be experiencing blood clots and strokes. Doctors are reporting an increase in virus patients with blood clots, gel-like clumps of blood which can be deadly, and a significant number of young adults in their 30s and 40s. A recent study in the Netherlands found that over 30% of virus patients in intensive care experience blood clotting. Since the virus is a respiratory illness, doctors expected the virus to impact the lungs but not the blood. Hospitals are now testing blood thinners on patients. We acquired internal Chinese documents showing that 5 days before China announced human-to-human transmission, the Chinese CDC had already made plans for the outbreak of the virus and told its local branches to be prepared. On January 15th, the Inner Mongolia CDC issued an urgent notice to local branches, saying the country's national-level CDC had made plans for diagnosis, treatment, prevention, and control of a novel coronavirus. It asked local branches to build up expert teams and told hospitals to prepare adequate drugs and medical supplies. This document reads, "For internal use only, do not share online." This is the same day the Wuhan CDC said there was no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission. China eventually admitted the virus could be passed between humans 5 days later. A video from Beijing's Chaoyang district shows a family being taken away by medical staff. This district is classified as high risk. Chinese state media say that in Guangzhou, around 140,000 people have been tested this month. They say 185 people were infected, with 90% of them not showing symptoms. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has responded to global calls to hold the CCP accountable for the spread of the CCP virus. He said AIDS originated in the U.S., but nobody held the U.S. accountable for it.
上个世纪80年代，艾滋病首先在美国发现，并且蔓延至全世界，不知道给世界上多少人造成痛苦。有谁找美国追责了吗？
U.S. national security commentator John Noonan tweeted, "Is it just me, or is Chinese propaganda getting lazier? Maybe they don't realize our internet isn't censored by communists, and that Americans are perfectly capable of spending 11 seconds on Google and learning that AIDS originated in the Belgian Congo nearly a century ago." The same spokesman was asked about U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo's comment that wet markets are a disease risk and that China should close them down. The spokesman responded, there are no wet markets in China, only farmers markets and seafood markets. But even local Chinese media say the market in Wuhan, where the virus is supposed to have originated, has 8 shops permitted to sell wildlife, like frogs, snakes, hedgehogs, and other animals. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper is calling for an end to the Chinese Communist regime's disinformation. Canada's Public Health Authority says 1 million KN95 masks bought from China do not meet the standard for healthcare workers and will not be distributed to frontline medical staff. It's not clear if Canada will get a refund. Spain is returning a second batch of faulty virus test kits to China. Spain now wants a full refund for all 640,000. Counterfeit masks claiming to be made in Taiwan are surfacing in Japan. They say made in Taiwan, but fail to meet the standards needed to protect against the virus. But the product inspection certificate says the place of origin is Shenzhen, a city in mainland China. Taiwan's Minister of Health reminding people that Taiwan only donates masks abroad and doesn't sell them. Taiwan just donated 2 million masks to Japan. Meanwhile, California's Governor Gavin Newsom announced he's signing a $1 billion contract with China for medical supplies. His decision has drawn debate from senators who question if it's wise to procure masks from BYD, a Chinese car company that only recently converted to producing masks. And 16 U.S. senators are calling for developing countries to disclose whether they are indebted to the Chinese regime before asking the international community for financial help amid the pandemic. The Chinese regime is heavily criticized for its lack of transparency when it comes to the virus. Now, parts of China's financial sector is coming under fire too, after the oil collapse left investors with staggering losses.
Thousands of Chinese investors were shocked on Wednesday after receiving a notice from the Bank of China telling them they'd lost their investment. Some even owe the bank tens of thousands of dollars.
I got 90,000 yuan worth of contracts. Now I need to pay them over 150,000 yuan. I've lost all of my investment and even need to pay an additional deposit.
These individual investors have put their money in a product linked to foreign oil futures called crude oil bao, sold by the state-owned Bank of China. After Monday's oil price crash, the Bank of China halted new transactions for this product, and on Wednesday, it told investors they need to pay what they owe the bank based on this price, a historic low of negative $37 a barrel. Investors were stunned. According to a report by Radio Free Asia, the investors' total loss could be over $4 billion. One receipt circulating online shows the person bought 20,000 contracts and suffered a loss of $1.3 million. His original investment of $550,000 gone, and he even owes the bank $750,000. Angry investors are questioning the bank's risk management and disclosure practices. Some say in the agreement it says investors will be warned when their loss is over 50%, but they hadn't received any warning. They also said that they didn't receive an alert that the oil price could turn negative. Investors also pointed out the product itself has defects. They said the bank waits before the last day of trading to update their contract, instead of doing it several days ahead, like other providers of similar products. According to local media reports, since Wednesday in several cities, some investors are going to Bank of China branches and regulatory agencies to demand answers. They are also getting together to file class action lawsuits against the bank. Chinese regulators have ordered the bank to self-investigate. A post circulating online appears to show an internal memo in which local Bank of China branches are warned to prepare for gatherings or protests, and says security staff need to be armed. The post could not be independently verified.
U.S. stock regulators this week are warning investors about the risks of Chinese company stocks. This comes after a blowout of China's biggest coffee chain and a growing list of Chinese company accounting scandals. The world is now bearing the huge cost of the Chinese regime's intransparency, but public health is not the only area where lack of transparency from China is causing real pain. On Tuesday, U.S. stock regulators called China out for not giving them the information gathered during audits of their U.S.-listed companies, putting investors at risk. Investors were hoping it was a belated April Fool's joke. It wasn't. On April 2nd, 2020, Nasdaq-listed Luckin Coffee, China's biggest coffee chain, said it had fabricated 40% of its annual sales. Its share price fell 80% the following day. Luckin was once considered a miracle company. It was less than 2 years old when it filed its initial public offering IPO in the U.S. in 2019 and raised over $600 million. This February, when Muddy Waters Research published a report calling out the coffee chain as a fraud and a fundamentally broken business, Luckin dismissed the claims as misleading and false allegations. But the company did eventually admit to its wrongdoings, although unapologetically. In fact, it seemed to take pride in cheating U.S. investors of their cash. Social media posts showed posters at one store saying, "We are the pride of Chinese produce, the harvester of America." It's not the first time U.S. investors have faced such a harvester. U.S.-listed Chinese companies have a history of fraud and intransparency. Over 50 Chinese companies were delisted after a massive fraud bust. In 2011, billions of dollars in market capitalization was lost. The scale of the fraud was even made into a movie, The China Hustle, which accuses Wall Street banks, auditors, and lawyers of knowingly complying with the malpractice and profiting from it. The movie warns of an economic disaster if this continues. If a Chinese company wants to go public in the U.S., they need to be sponsored by Wall Street's investment banks. The banks normally charge a fee of 3 to 7% of the money raised. They also need an auditor registered in the United States. The banks and auditors that sponsor Chinese companies tend to be the top firms in the profession, but that doesn't prevent things from going wrong. The system itself also has its loopholes. China is one of the few countries that doesn't allow U.S. regulators to see their audit books. The regime claims the books are national secrets and cannot be shared with outside parties. During a 2015 fraud investigation, U.S. regulators asked for audit records for 9 Chinese companies, but the Big Four accounting firms refused to turn them over. The accounting firms later paid $500,000 each to settle the dispute. But regulators say there are still significant obstacles to inspecting Chinese companies. Many of the U.S.-listed companies are not regular privately owned businesses. They're either state-owned or have close ties with the Chinese Communist Party. Among the 5 most valuable U.S.-listed Chinese companies, 3 are energy or finance companies owned by the Chinese regime. Even the founder of the privately owned Alibaba, Jack Ma, is a card-carrying Communist Party member who has vowed to happily hand over all of his businesses to the party if he were asked to do so. According to a New York Times report, one winner in Alibaba's lucrative New York IPO was Boyu Capital, a private equity firm founded by a grandson of former communist leader Jiang Zemin. Chinese fugitive billionaire Guo Wengui once said that the top 10 Chinese companies, including the supposedly privately owned Huawei, Alibaba, and Tencent, are in fact militarized state-owned enterprises controlled by the Jiang family. These are the types of companies taking cash from U.S. investors without proper disclosure. In February 2019, there were 156 Chinese companies listed on the major 3 U.S. exchanges, with a total market capitalization of $1.2 trillion. The overnight implosion of Luckin Coffee is not the end of the story. Market experts say this is a painful reminder of the extreme fraud risk posed by China-based companies. Last year, the media reported that the Trump administration is considering delisting Chinese firms from U.S. markets. In a separate move, Senator Marco Rubio introduced a bill last year that would delist Chinese companies that do not comply with American laws. But so far, there is no indication if or when that will happen. In an interview with Bloomberg, short seller Carson Block said,
"My view, China is a massive asset bubble and credit bubble."
And he said it's only a matter of time if nothing is done, and the U.S. will not avoid the blow. The Federal Communications Commission ordered 3 Chinese telecom carriers to prove that they should be allowed to stay in the U.S.
The FCC will bar the companies from operating in the United States unless they can show they are free of influence from the Chinese regime. FCC Commissioner Jeffrey Starks says we've never had a greater need to ensure the security of our communications. It's the latest effort by the FCC to crack down on national security risks posed by Chinese telecoms firms. Earlier this month, the U.S. Justice Department and other federal agencies recommended that China Telecom's authorization to operate in the United States be revoked. The company had been diverting overseas internet traffic through China, raising concerns that data was accessed by the Chinese regime.
Several U.S. lawmakers are calling out YouTube after it said videos not in line with the World Health Organization would be removed.
Many accuse the WHO of acting as a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party during the pandemic, the Secretary of State saying yesterday the organization has lost its credibility. But now YouTube will censor and remove any videos not in line with the WHO's recommendations. Senator Ted Cruz responded on Twitter, saying the WHO shamelessly broadcasts Chinese Communist propaganda, and now YouTube is saying it will censor anything contrary to the WHO. The WHO has praised China's response to the crisis despite the regime's cover-up through silencing whistleblowers and destroying virus samples. Taiwan warned the WHO that the virus could be passed between humans back in December, but the warnings were ignored. The WHO instead echoed the Chinese regime's claim there was no human-to-human transmission, costing the world almost a month of preparation time. The agency was also criticized for advising countries not to impose travel restrictions to curb the spread of the virus. Most of the world has now implemented some form of them. It's unclear if any action will be taken to reverse YouTube's decision.
Over 50,000 Americans have lost their lives from the CCP virus. From nearly 900,000 confirmed cases, over 90,000 have recovered, and some states have started opening up again. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the details.
Today in the U.S., for the first time in about a month, some Southerners can get out of the house. Here's how a salon in Georgia is starting to reopen its doors.
And we stop them before they enter the store and make sure that we get their temperature and everything.
Alaska, Oklahoma, and Texas are also allowing similar businesses to reopen today. But some Georgia residents aren't so pleased with the decision. Protests erupted in Atlanta today, giving voice to those wanting the state to remain locked down. This as other Americans protest to end lockdowns in their states. Illinois and Michigan extending stay-at-home orders.
While this order is extended to May 15th, I am lifting some of the restrictions.
That's despite pushback from some residents and the state's Republican legislators. The Michigan House Speaker posting in a tweet yesterday, the House and Senate will convene tomorrow to examine our government's response. And Virginia, another state with no plans to return to normal for now. The state is now seeing the longest stay-at-home order in the nation, set to end in mid-June. But for other states, lockdown orders never happened, like in South Dakota.
The data is showing us that we are bending our curve.
South Dakota has yet to see a statewide surge in cases, reporting a total of 10 deaths. U.S. hotspot New York is seeing improvements too. Another day of fewer hospitalizations and little change in the number of new cases. To lower the risk of a possible second wave, the governor is looking at how the virus was handled early on.
But we left the back door open because the virus had left China by the time we did the China travel ban.
He says the virus likely spread to New York from Europe, where it had already taken root. The Chinese regime didn't promptly warn the world about human-to-human transmission, so it was already spreading to other countries by that time. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A roughly $480 billion virus relief package is now official. President Trump signed the funding package into law this afternoon in the Oval Office.
84 other countries either.
Another enormous aid package has been approved by the White House.
So with that, I'll sign the bill.
On Friday, President Donald Trump signed the almost $500 billion relief bill into law. The funds will go towards expanding loans for small businesses that are struggling amid the pandemic.
That should have never happened. This should have never happened to our country. This should have never happened to 184 other countries either. This was a disgrace that it was allowed to happen.
Priced at approximately $484 billion, the bill adds to the already historic levels of spending. It authorizes an additional $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, which was set up to help hard-hit businesses cover employee payroll and other expenses. Funding for the program ran dry earlier this month, prompting an outcry from the business community. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin also promised surveillance to stop bigger companies who don't have as much need from accessing the money. The companies that do apply may need to provide justification for seeking loans. The bill will also deliver aid to hospitals and expand virus testing.
California is beginning to see its famous beach weather. And with that, Governor Gavin Newsom warned residents not to let their guard down this weekend. 115 deaths were reported yesterday, the most the state has seen.
Yesterday was the deadliest day.
California Governor Gavin Newsom announced that Wednesday was the deadliest day the state has faced since the coronavirus outbreak began. The news prompted the governor to plead for continued social distancing as Californians trickle back to local beaches under the lure of warm weather.
115 human beings lost their lives, families torn apart. It was the deadliest day in the state of California. I don't say that blithely. I don't say that certainly cheerfully. I don't say that except in any way, shape, or form to do justice to those individuals.
California is the most populous state in the U.S., and Newsom has been credited with taking early action to lock down the state, which has seen fewer cases than New York and other East Coast states. But with warmer weather on the horizon, Newsom warned Californians not to let their guard down.
That means people are prone to want to go to the beaches, parks, playgrounds, and go on a hike. And I anticipate there'll be a significant increase in volume. But I also think if there is, and people aren't practicing physical distancing, I'll be announcing in a week or so these numbers going back up. I don't think anybody wants to hear that.
Governments around the globe are looking into high-tech ways to trace the contacts of those infected with the virus and prevent it from spreading. But privacy activists warn that the surveillance technology may not be so easy to roll back after the pandemic has passed.
Apple and Google recently announced a joint effort to help public health agencies worldwide. They plan to trace the contacts of infected people using Bluetooth wireless technology. Senior researcher from the University of Toronto, John Scott Railton, questioned if the contact tracing technology could really help contain virus spread.
We don't know if these contact tracing technology ideas are going to work. If you do an experiment with them in real time, at the scale of a population, it could go horribly for a lot of different ways. It could also have extremely negative long-term effects on privacy.
Earlier this month, the UK Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, announced the development of an NHS app with similar technology. It can trace movements and notify users to prevent contact with those who are infected. But privacy activists like Silke Carlo say the tech could take away freedoms after the pandemic has passed.
So we have to think, what is life going to be like after the first phase of this pandemic, and the second and the third? And how much of our liberty are we willing to lose? And we've got to be very, very cautious about that.
She also raises another concern. After this phase of the pandemic is over, we may find ourselves building a surveillance architecture, one that supports a very different world to the one we used to live in.
To better understand how the CCP virus spreads in the population, Germany is conducting several antibody studies. Scientists hope to find out how widespread undiagnosed infections are and whether some part of the population has become immune. NTD's Germany correspondent Christian Watchen has the story.
Germany is carrying out the largest antibody testing regime in Europe. Antibodies simply show whether someone's immune system has encountered the virus. One study just got underway in Munich. It samples 3,000 selected households for a whole year.
Determining the estimated number of unknown cases is very important. We need to know the amount of spreading and infections of the new SARS coronavirus 2 in Germany.
University staff go from door to door to recruit participants.
First, the people will be informed about the procedure in the study by our teams. They need to know what is happening. They need to answer a couple of questions on a daily basis. We take some 3 millimeters of blood, which will be tested for antibodies.
Scientists hope more data on the spread of infections can give insight into how effective social distancing and other measures have been. And that could help politicians decide when and how to ease them.
Scientists caution that there's no proof yet that antibodies confer protection against the virus. And it's also not clear yet how long such immunity would last.
More antibody studies are underway or about to begin in Germany. One is utilizing samples from blood banks across the country. Another takes a closer look at hotspot communities. And the largest and most representative study will involve 15,000 people at over 150 locations. It starts next month. Some observers say, since there are still many unknowns about the virus, it is too early to use results from these studies to justify easing measures. Reporting by Christian Watchin, NTD News, Berlin.
And in the UK, scientists at Oxford University are working hard on a vaccine. They're already hitting critical research milestones.
Scientists in Britain began vaccine trials on Thursday. At Oxford University, 2 volunteers became the first people in the world to receive a shot of a potential vaccine. And in Vienna, 200 people have gathered to protest against Austria's lockdown measures. Police broke up the crowd due to a rule that currently prohibits gatherings of more than 5 people. World leaders met virtually on Friday to discuss tackling the spread of the virus. Their goal is to raise $8.1 billion to ramp up work on prevention, diagnostics, and treatment. The WHO initiated the meeting. A spokesman for the U.S. said that the United States would not be involved.
2 New York City nonprofits are teaming up to feed New Yorkers. They're giving away boxes of groceries to residents in Harlem and the Bronx.
2 New York City nonprofits are teaming up to provide families with boxes of groceries. Children's Aid and the West Side Campaign Against Hunger.
In each box, there are grains, protein, fruit, vegetables, and shelf-stable milk.
They distribute food boxes every week. Alternating between Harlem and the Bronx, the organizations each hand out 100 boxes of food. A Harlem resident says the giveaway helps keep her kids safe.
Right now, it's not easy to get to the store, number one, stand in line, wait, bringing the kids out, makes you wonder, makes you worry, they're touching things, just too many things to think about.
Another resident says the food isn't for him.
Presently, my parents is recovering from COVID, and I plan on taking it to them.
Children's Aid has been serving communities in New York City since 1853. The West Side Campaign Against Hunger has been in the city for 40 years.
Children confined to their homes under lockdown are drawing what they miss most. No matter where they are in the world, the themes are often the same.
From Tokyo to Buenos Aires and New York to Kathmandu, kids have taken to their balconies or front lawns to display drawings they've created. 8-year-old Reiko Matsui in Tokyo draws himself between his grandparents, all 3 of them smiling together. His older sister Yaya comes up with something a little different.
I drew a picture of me hanging out with my friends. What I want to do the most right now is hang out with my friends.
In the German town of Bad Honnef, 6-year-old Tom says,
I am Tom. I am 6 years old. I have painted Grandma and Grandpa because I like them and because I am missing them so much.
Besides longed-for grandparents, children are also depicting the sports they miss. Ivan Posta and brother Vince, living in the Hungarian capital Budapest, draw huge soccer balls. Shaurya is 10 and lives in India's capital of New Delhi.
What I drew basically was like all my favorite restaurants. I drew Starbucks, KFC, McDonald's, and I drew my school because mostly they're the 4 most important things, except my friends also.
4-year-old Mila stands outside her home holding a drawing of her family.
I made plans with my mother and the virus ruined everything. We planned to go on a trip with my brother Yang with my support wheels, and in the end, we didn't go because of the coronavirus.
Lydia lives in the Big Apple. She says she feels lonely.
I miss being social with people, and I drew this picture of me selling lemonade and what it could be like after. And selling lemonade is an example because you can actually talk to people and interact. Now, because of lockdown, you can't really see people.
But for Nipun, lockdowns haven't made much of a difference.
I don't feel anything because I like staying home. I think it's more fun to stay at home than going outside.
In Damascus, 4-year-old Halak paints the virus in red.
I stay at home and I draw and draw and draw, and I stay at home a lot until the coronavirus goes away.
She says she wants to be a dancer when she grows up.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.